There are amazing things that can happen when we are on mission together. And that's what we're talking about right now. And tonight specifically, digging into what it looks like in a family on mission to have predictable patterns. So let me just show you again this kind of family on mission, this little triangle. It's got all the different elements. So we talked about spiritual parenting and what it looks like for people to lead, okay, basically. This particular body, that would be Eric and me, spiritual parents. But there are lots of bodies, there are lots of families on mission. That's what the church is. And in other ways, you guys all have people that pour into you outside of us and all that. That's healthy, right? That's what we call extended family on mission together. Tonight we're going over to predictable patterns, and we're going to talk about how spiritual parents actually set the predictable patterns for a family. Now, if I think of it with my family, with our family, it is our job to set the patterns for our kids, right? Chase does not normally say, oh, look at the time. Woo, I'm feeling a little worn out. I should go put myself down for a nap. You know what I'm saying? Like, typically they don't get up in the morning and say, I will have breakfast and it will be healthy. It will be wholesome and I will love it. And not ice cream, which is really what I want and what I would pick if you let me choose, right? So parents have to set kind of the patterns. Now, obviously more when children are younger, and then as children grow, you can set fewer and fewer, because eventually they're not going to ask your permission anymore, right, with what they do. So you hope you've said things like, a family member, a family that lived next door to us, I heard her ask her adult child who was in college, have you eaten anything green today? You know, and she was like, I don't know. So that was still her mom's voice in her head. Have I eaten green things today? But not so much like, here's your lunch, eat that, you know, like we do now. It is our job, though, to set the predictable patterns for our kids. And it makes sense that we would set predictable patterns for people who are part of our family and mission. And we're going to dig into that and what it looks like for you as you're considering, like, what does that mean? Now, obviously, as a church, we do things like that, and I'll point those out. But even as we are personally leading people along as we go, it is very helpful to people when they can see this is what we do. You know, for a family, we eat dinner together on Monday nights. We, play this sport on Fridays. And on Saturday, we go do things with the church that are part of our lives or whatever, right? So it just helps us as we kind of nail down what our lives look like to come in, to be healthy when we have those patterns. Now, before we move on to that, I just want to invite Robert up, because as often as we can, I would love to get testimonies. A testimony is just a story of something good, of when we acted like a family on mission, because we've been talking about this for like 2 months. And so it's really good to hear, oh, we're getting this down, we're doing this right. So Robert's going to talk for...
Yeah. Woo! Yeah. So Tuesday night, late Tuesday night, I was caught unprepared with a flat tire. Bad flat too on the highway. And I'm sitting there freaking out because I was like, I ain't really got nobody here. And then it clicked into my mind and I was like, I do. So I called Eric, and I'm pretty sure he was home with his family. It was late. He lives all the way up in Wilderness. I'm in the middle of the highway freaking out. I'm thinking I'm going to get hit by a car. My knees are bad. So I call him up. I'm like, it wasn't even can you come help me? It was hey, do you know a good tow truck person? Because, you got connections and everything. And he was like, nah, man, where you at? I'm going to come to you. Took maybe, 10 minutes. He came, helped me change my tire, called the cop, made sure I wasn't getting hit because, I'm dark and my car is dark. So you can't see as you're going by. When you're going real fast, the thing. So he flagged down, made sure we were safe. Got the tire on. I didn't have any quarters. My spare tire was flat as well. He followed me all the way into Frisco. Now again, he lives in Wilderness. Followed me all the way to Frisco. The tire pump was broken on there. Followed me deeper into Frisco. Gave me a bunch of quarters. Made sure I was safe. Just took care of me. So I used to say I have my church family and I got my regular family. And Tuesday it combined to where y'all just my family. So, yeah, right on.
Thank you, Robert. And I happen to live with that person, so I can tell you, and I won't as we give more testimonies, obviously, for some of you guys, but the way it looked was about 10 o'clock or 10:15 or something. I can't remember what time it was. Eric came and sat down on the couch and went, ring, 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 ring. His phone rings. He looked at it. He talked for a second. He said, I'll be back in a couple hours. I'm going to go help Robert. So he headed out the door, and I think I was asleep or in bed at least by the time he got home. And there was never any mention of like, oh, or like, oh my gosh. It was just kind of normal. Like, right? Like Robert needs help. I'm going to go help Robert. So that's what we're talking about is when we talk about family, remember, we can have friends, we can have acquaintances, we can have all sorts of people rotating through our lives. But when it's family, we get to ask, and people will come. Right? And that's the point. And most of the people here don't. We have, Eric always says we have 1,000 pot-smoking buddies. Well, not me, but, like mostly in general. A bunch of people you can go drinking with, but, in my mind, I still remember this young woman who we met when we came, who had been part of the community for 7 years, had worked for the Summit Daily, which she knew everybody through that job, and had 1,000 friends. And then she got pregnant unexpectedly. And guess who couldn't go drinking anymore? Guess who couldn't come do all the fun things anymore? Guess who needed crackers in the middle of the night because she was nauseated, and we had hardly known her at all, and she called us. So that's the point, is that's what we are going to be and what we are being to one another. It is up to you, though, how deep you want to come into that world. And we're all pretty dysfunctional, so we're gonna disappoint each other. We're gonna tick each other off from time to time. We're not gonna know what to do all the time. Sometime you're gonna need something said in a particular way that someone's not gonna say, and you're gonna get your feelings hurt. But that's family, right? And when we're committed to one another, we work through it. Meanwhile, people are gonna ditch us because we can't do the fun things or because it's 10:30 at night. And who wants to go help a guy do all of that at 10:30 at night? Family, right? That's it. So, we want to talk about Jesus tonight and how Jesus set these predictable patterns for his family. Now remember, Jesus created the most unbelievable, transformative, spiritual family ever. A single guy, So it's very possible to do these things no matter who you are. Jesus modeled these things for us. And we're always trying to look at what Jesus said and what he did, but also the way he did it. So sometimes I think we get in our heads, it's not really applicable anymore. It doesn't really make sense to us anymore to look at these things the way Jesus did. It does. It's important for us to also look at the way Jesus did things. And there was a way that he set down predictable patterns for his spiritual family. So let's just look at this. Predictable patterns, so this is another triangle, okay? So this is take this triangle out of the other triangle. Predictable patterns was on the last triangle. Now it's its own triangle, all right? Get it? Yep. And I will just say, if there's anyone listening to the podcast and you're confused by the end of this message because you're not able to see, just email me and I'll send you the PowerPoint. So in the up dimension, Jesus taught us how to abide. In the in dimension, taught us how to prune. And in the out dimension, how to be fruitful. And this kind of idea comes from John 15, where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me or abide in me, you will bear fruit. Because, hey, if a branch is connected to the vine, it will bear fruit. It doesn't have to work at it. It doesn't have to strive at it. It doesn't have to get up in the morning and say, I'm going to bear fruit today. It just does. When it's connected to the vine and it's healthy, it bears fruit. And out of that out dimension is fruitfulness, which is important. Because if a branch is not fruitful, it gets chopped off and thrown into the fire, which is not the place we want to be. Okay? So it is important that we bear fruit, but we can't bear fruit by just trying to bear fruit. We have to bear fruit by abiding. So this whole beautiful picture, we call it the semicircle with the pendulum swinging back and forth between abiding and fruitfulness. The only way to get from a very fruitful harvest type of season back to abiding is to prune. We hate pruning because especially as Americans, we like to be busy. We like to fill up every part of our lives with either activity or nothing, I don't know, like to not have actual rest and space. So pruning can be really painful. I would imagine for a little vine, it did not like the shearing scissors coming at it from the master gardener. No, look at me, I'm all leafy. I'm bearing fruit. No, you know what? The leaves aren't the fruit. And what would happen to these plants is if they weren't pruned back, they would start sprouting all these leaves before the fruit came. And all the nutrition and the energy, if you will, from the plant went into these other kinds of fruit, like these leaves and stuff. But it wasn't fruit that would last, and it wasn't anything that would produce more fruit. You know what I'm saying? So the gardener had to come clip off all of those pretty-looking flowers and grass and leaves so that it left room for the fruit to actually emerge, which is us, okay? We are fruit, and we are to bear fruit, which means we are to be the kind of fruit-bearing fruit that doesn't stop at us, right? So I often like to think of us as not like a little apple, but as an orchard, right? We are meant to take the seeds that are in us and keep planting them outward. That's how multiplication works, which is a movement, right? And not just we're going to add a couple people along because now we've got a couple of really nice Christians that will make it to heaven. That's not the point. The point is for us to become disciples, and disciples multiply themselves in other people. Disciples make disciples. So let's see how Jesus abided and showed us how to abide in these different rhythms. So we see him abiding daily. So in Mark 1:35, this is just one of many, many examples of Jesus doing this. It says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Every day, Jesus spent time with the Father. And often you would see him come back to the disciples and say things like, we're leaving. And they're like, but, we're really popular here. Like thousands of people are hanging around us right now. Are you kidding me? Like people haven't liked us in the last 10 cities we've been in. Now all of a sudden we're popular. What do you mean we're leaving? We had just talked to the Father and the Father said go. And he says, I don't do anything I don't see the Father doing. So we're going. That's where he received everything that he needed, was through these times. We see him in Luke 4:16 with the weekly rhythm. When he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, or oikos, that's the Greek word there, he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read the scriptures. So he had a weekly rhythm. For him and for other Jews, it was the Sabbath. They went to the synagogue. They didn't just go and put in their time. They went with their entire oikos. So Jesus would have gone, if he were back home like this, he would have gone with all of the other tekton, which is builders, Jesus' oikos and his family business and all this stuff. So they went communally, but also they had time to spend time in prayer. So that was his weekly rhythm of abiding with the Lord. In Matthew 16:13, it says, Jesus takes his disciples to Caesarea Philippi. So he takes away his 12. They've been working really, really hard. He takes them off to this place called Caesarea Philippi for a few-day retreat, probably. So because it wasn't that far away. It was just far enough away that it's like you wouldn't want to go there and back in the same day. We know this because of geography and how, where everything is at. And there were some amazing things that came out of this. This is the retreat they were on where Peter says, I think you're the Messiah. You're the Son of God. And he's like, whoa. To the point where I've heard people say, retreat leads us into revelation. That this amazing, massive revelation that Peter came up with came from being on retreat, from just resting. That's called abiding. And when you think of a retreat with Jesus, we tend to think of Israel as rocky and dusty. But this is actually one of the places that they think he might have taken them. This is in Caesarea Philippi. Banias Falls. There are many little waterfalls like this. That would be a nice place to go on a retreat, right? Now, the last retreat our leadership went on was close, okay, because it was awesome. But that's super sweet. So remember, he's not skimping them on stuff. He's not like taking them off to a dark corner and making them pray. They're retreating. They're relaxing. They're enjoying life. They're abiding in between these massive seasons of outpouring of fruitfulness that they have. And then occasionally, in Matthew 15:21, it says, Jesus took the disciples away to Tyre and Sidon, which was really far away. So it was probably a week or two they were off there just retreating alone, just them, away from everybody else, so that they could be restored. And really the idea was far enough away that nobody would recognize them. And now in some of these places that they try to sneak off to, people show up because they've heard about Jesus. But the point of it is to get away from anybody who would recognize them, to get them away from fruitfulness, to prune them back from productivity so that they can receive from each other. And, hanging out with Jesus in a place like Banias Falls sounds awesome. You know what I'm saying? Like that's probably the epitome of abiding that you could ever have. And we need to be thinking about how we abide individually, right? So be thinking, am I spending time with God daily, weekly? The other thing you could call monthly or seasonally, and then annually, or for Jesus it was more like occasional, because we don't know that every year he planned a retreat like that. Just know that every once in a while they got away. But we're also looking at how we do it as a corporate body, as Elements Church. So we don't really have a daily rhythm for how we abide together, although it's intriguing to think if we could, as far as reading the same scripture and talking about those things and at least having access to that. We've talked about it, but don't have a rhythm for that yet. Our weekly rhythm of prayer right now is Sunday nights at 5 o'clock. You're welcome to come anytime you want and pray with us. It is a weekly rhythm. It's only a half hour, but it's good. We kind of get some stuff out tonight. Asa led us in prayer, and a lot of great stuff came tumbling out, and that's where we join together to be able to do that. Our monthly rhythm of prayer right now is Vigil. So we just had it on Friday nights, 4 hours of prayer, where a different person led it each night. Very diverse, very cool, very creative. The last hour, it was just me and Matt, actually, and we prayed into some stuff with some really missional stuff that was like, whoa, I'm so thankful for this space. I guess I could have just gone home and I could have done it by myself, but it was powerful doing it with another believer. So it was awesome. And then occasionally, yearly, like we're going to this Bethel worship night. The information's in the bulletin. It's just a thing that we do every once in a while, right? And we might as well do it together. Sure, I can go off by myself and have a great night of worship by myself, but it's really cool if we get to do that together. We get to experience it together. The last time I went to one of these, I guess it was almost 2 years ago, Rochelle and I just went. And it was powerful, just being with one other person and being in that environment of worship and praise. So we as a body are doing things like that. I want to encourage you to jump in. And to ask yourself, do I have a rhythm of doing these things by myself, sure, but also with other people who are believers? And Jesus shows them how to prune back. He shows them that second part of the predictable patterns. In pretty much every way, every time he says, step back from this, or he says, let's go away for a while, or he says, seriously, you're going to call down fire from heaven? Dudes, get your head on straight. You seriously need to cut back the power trip that you're on right now. Of course, we're not killing people because they don't belong to us or whatever. Jesus showed them this again and again. But the other kind of rhythm that we really see him showing us is the fruitful rhythm. So we've got the abiding, we've got the pruning, and then we've got the fruitful part. And I just want us to remember that it is also our job as disciples to be fruitful. And honestly, it's not enough to just believe the right things and to get by and to say, yeah, sure, I did the things that I was supposed to do. You know, we're all trying to catch up because people just been lying for a long time. I don't know if it's every country in the West or it's just us. We've just been lying to people that really all you have to do is believe certain things and say these certain prayers and show up and maybe give money. But if you really, really love God, you'll hang out with the kids one time a month or something, and you'll be great. You'll make it to heaven. Everything will be fine. I have no idea where the line is on any of that stuff because at some point we do transfer from eternal death to eternal life. God knows all of that stuff. But what I do know is the Bible shows us that to be a disciple is actually a lot more than that. It actually means taking up our cross and following Jesus wherever it is he goes. And sometimes he's going to the poor and the destitute and the hated. That's what we talked about last week. Who belongs in the family? Everybody. You know, everybody. Even if they don't feel like they belong in mine, they belong in his, which means they should belong in mine. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it is our job to go out and find people who are lost. Jesus makes himself like the shepherd who goes out and finds the one lost sheep. He says, these 99 are okay, but there's one out there. And that idiot sheep wandered off all by himself. It wasn't the shepherd's fault. Got himself in some tiny little hole somewhere that he can't figure out and is at risk because it's like one of the only animals that has no defense at all for predators. And the shepherd's got to go out in the middle of nowhere with wolves and, you know, all kinds of predators around and get that thing. And it's like they don't even want to come. They got to hook them. They got to pull them out by their feet. I've seen this on YouTube. You know what I'm saying? But I've seen it. You know, like the amazing things that shepherds have to do to go rescue this dumb sheep. And yet, it's worth it. Because that's us, right? That was us. If we know Christ, it was us who he went out to rescue. And that's our job too. He doesn't just say, yeah, I'm going to do all these great things. He says, and you're following me, which means I've provided an example that you are meant to follow. You know, John 13, one of the nastiest things he does is wash his disciples' feet. And at the end of it, he says, this is not just for fun or for kicks or for me to look like an awesome servant savior. It's for you to do to each other. I'm giving you an example so you'll know what to do for one another. Because they're all like, we're supposed to fight about who's the greatest, right? That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to constantly war with each other about who's the coolest, who's the best, who's got the best role, who's got the best position. He's like, oh my gosh, you know, I can imagine he probably facepalmed like 1,000 times all the time. Like, seriously? So he gives us these models, and one of the models that he gives us is how to be fruitful. So we see all these different spaces that Jesus finds himself in. I want to go through them when we're talking about fruitfulness. So the intimate space that Jesus had. Now, intimate space, sociologists tell us, is the closest couple of people around us. That's often a spouse, but sometimes a best friend or a roommate or something else. So in Jesus' intimate space, he had these particular guys. Can you think of the people that you would name as some of the closest people to Jesus? Anybody? Shout them out. Peter, James, and John. We see this inner circle among the disciples over and over again. I don't know if it's because he only invited them or they're the only ones who ever wanted to come. But they ended up a little closer to Jesus than the other disciples. So Peter, James, and John occupy this very intimate space with him. And we see it in Matthew 17, 1 through 9, at his transfiguration, which is one of the most powerful things that ever happened to Jesus. Guess who was there? Only those three guys. The other disciples were sleeping. Okay? So that's cool. They got a good night's rest, but Peter, James, and John got to be there when that happened. There was a heavier yoke for them to be that close to Jesus, I can guarantee you that. But it was worth it to them to get close. So he had this intimate space kind of covered. His personal space goes from like 2 to 12 people. And it's the kind of space, again, this is all from sociology. There's a book called The Search to Belong that kind of just really dives into this and looks at just cultures overall. We're looking usually for those handful of people around us that we can really get to know. And in our culture, we usually think of it as things like nuclear family or I don't know, a small group. This is where the number comes from for small groups. And we see this from Jesus. There was a personal space that was filled by his 12 disciples. So sometimes he would sit down and just spend time with these 12 that he didn't spend with other people. And he would pull them away on these retreats, just them, right? And nobody else got to come. It was very exclusive. And it was exclusive for a reason. These were his people of peace who were willing to follow him. All but one of them died. Well, you can't say Judas was martyred, but he did die. But other than John, the Apostle John, who died of natural causes in very, very old age, they all were martyred, church history tells us. So they, again, bore a heavier cost for being in this circle with Jesus too. It was worth it, right? That's the point. So he surrounded himself with these people, and in Matthew 26, 17 through 30, it's just a good example because it's the Lord's Supper. And we don't see 50 people at that table, we see 13, right? 12 plus Jesus. So this is one of the spaces that we see Jesus occupying. Then we see social space. Now, social space is kind of the size that encapsulates extended family. So you're talking about really like 20, maybe all the way up to 70 people for Jesus, maybe 50. It was people who rotated around him outside of those 12 disciples, but were still part of his oikos, we call it. Now, oikos means extended family. It just means family in the Eastern world, but we have to say extended because we don't think of family the same way they do. So we see the 72, and in Luke 10, you know that passage where we talk about people of peace, and I illustrate very often, this is what Jesus said, go into a city, find a person of peace, someone who welcomes you, wants to serve you, likes you, wants to spend time with you, stay with that person, eat with that person, heal the sick there, preach the good news, right? This is the person of peace strategy of how he did evangelism. He didn't just do it to everybody, even people that were like, I don't want what you're selling. They were like, okay, see ya. We do want to actually interact with people who want what we're saying, right? In that passage, this is where it comes from. The 72 he's sending out. In Luke 9, he sent out the 12. But in Luke 10, he sends out the 72. And we don't exactly know who is involved in this group of 72. It could be, we hear about the women who are financially supporting him, who travel kind of a little bit behind, maybe where the disciples are going. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, brothers and sisters there, might have been part of it. But just a lot of oikos that he kind of interacted with in different ways were outside of the 12 disciples, and that's who these 72 were. And he spent a lot of time with them. We don't always see it in everything that we're looking at, but Jesus spent a lot of time in oikos, in these family dwellings. So he wasn't just with the disciples when he did this. I mean, just the amount of times that you see in the New Testament where it says, when he came through Bethany, he stayed with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. We miss that. But that is one of those groups of people that he was spending time with again and again. So he surrounded himself with this more like social space. It offered to him different kind of friendships, different kind of family than just the 12 or just the 3. And then, of course, we see him in public space. And his public space is pretty much anything, let's say 50 people and up. There are particular uses for public space, and we see with Jesus him doing this with the crowds. And Matthew 4:25 is just one place, all through the Gospels, of course, where it says large crowds followed him. So it could be up to thousands and thousands and thousands. And in some churches, we see this. Their large gathering is thousands of people. That's public space. It could be 50 or it could be 3,000. Public space is what happens when you go to a Broncos game. It's a bunch of people, they're joined together doing the same thing. You're never going to really know any of those people well, but you have kind of a shared experience. It's important. It's a space for a reason, you know what I mean? So let me just look at for a second what that means for us. That Jesus modeled having people and relationships in each of these spaces. What it means for us individually, but really what it means for us as a church. Because it's our job to create the predictable patterns. But what I'm going to encourage you to do tonight is to dig into the predictable patterns and make sure you're a part of them. Because if you're not, you're missing something. And if Jesus wasn't going to miss out on those things, then I would probably recommend that we not. Right? Because he's our example. So personal space, remember that's up to 12 people. I prefer it to be a little smaller. to be honest, because it's hard to get to know that many people one-on-one. Now, Jesus traveled with these guys, lived with these guys full-time. Didn't have a family of his own, biological family. Didn't really have a job outside of doing what he did with them. So now I'm thinking about myself and what I have going and how many people I can really bring into that space. Is probably a little fewer than what Jesus did. But still, let's say up to 12 people. Now, this is where we can really get to know them. We have our tribe. We have our people. We have those people that we know we can call at any hour. There are not that many people in our lives like that, unless we really create it very strongly. But that's the point. Not everybody's going to be as close when it comes to personal space. The primary purpose of this for us is discipleship. Discipleship, high invitation, high challenge discipleship happens really, really well in this space. High invitation, high challenge discipleship based on a person of peace strategy that says, I'm only going to disciple people in this space who want me. Now, even Jesus didn't try to disciple everybody at this level. Get it? Even Jesus didn't do that. He prayed all night long, the Bible tells us, and went out and chose 12 people that he knew were supposed to be with him to that degree. Now, he was trying to institute the church, okay? And he had 3 years to do everything that he needed to do with these guys. And guess who started the church after he died and was risen again and left and went to heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father? Those guys. I mean, you look at him at the beginning and you'd be like, oh, dear God, this is going to take 45 years. But because of the level of intensity, the level of investment that can happen in this space, they were actually ready. And especially after Acts 2, when the Holy Spirit comes and they're all filled with the Spirit, oh my gosh, now they've got an extra empowering that sends them out. In fact, the only thing that was going to be powerful enough to send them out. Now they've got everything they need to be faithful to start this worldwide movement of the church that had taken over half of the Roman Empire within the first 100 years had been converted to Christianity. And that's with persecution, okay? That's not with massive buildings and great podcasts and amazing lights and really cool paintings on the back. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's with people dying because they believed in the stuff it still had taken over. So powerful, powerful discipleship happens in this space. It's not great for other things. It's not great for extended family because you only got 12 people or less. It's not great for mission because honestly, who wants to go out and serve with 4 other people? I don't. Not very often anyway. Every once in a while maybe, but and it's not extended family on mission the way Jesus did it, so it's not the most powerful place for mission. It's not the most powerful place for teaching because you can end up with some weird, funky stuff up in this. And I've had small groups around my whole life, and I've heard some weird stuff. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes, it's great when people can be released into their gifts. That's the purpose. But it's not the place that we're doing what we do here, right? Our primary vehicle to get to discipleship for us is huddles. Now, it doesn't mean it's not equal to discipleship. It's not the same thing as discipleship. It's just a great vehicle to get here. And what I mean by vehicle is, when I go pick up my kids from school, I could take an 18-wheeler. I probably couldn't, but let's just be theoretical. Or I could take the Subaru Crosstrek. Okay? Which one is probably going to get me there faster and better and safer? My Subaru is a better choice, okay? There are some vehicles that just work better to achieve the purpose that we're trying to get to. Here's why small groups are not great with this, the way we normally do it. They're inclusive, first of all. Anybody can show up. Anybody can come. Inclusivity is a great thing for everything except this. Okay, it's not that we're trying to be exclusive or leave people out just for fun. You can't do high invitation, high discipleship that way. You can't call somebody out on their crap. You can't say, hey, you've been processing looking at porn. Did you do it this week? Because if you did, we're all going to challenge you because that's something God talked to you about. You really want to do that when someone's sister's brothers-in-law is showing up? I doubt you do. Because then that person's going to be walking away saying, what? Because we haven't cultivated the invitation with that person yet. You know what I'm saying? So you can't bring the challenge. This is why accountability is non-existent in the American church. We're not doing it in the right way, in the right space. They have to be exclusive. You have to say, hey, you're a person of peace. You 5 people. Come with me. Because when it gets intense and when you don't want to hear what not just me, but what other people want to say to you, we're going to have to decide that we're going to do this together. And you're not going to do that with everybody, right? So that's personal space. If you're not part of a huddle, join one. We're probably going to have a couple starting up in the next month or 2. Join one. I'm telling you, people will get in your face, or at least they should be. And if they're not, come tell me, because obviously I need to dig into that more. This is the place that we should be saying. You know, Eric always says, awkward conversations, having awkward conversations. That's awful. I hate it. I hate to sit down with someone and say, what is really happening? Or to have them do it for me. But that's how we grow. And you're not going to do that with everybody. You just do it with a small group. That's why it works with this. And that's what Jesus taught us to do. He didn't go out and say, anybody who wants to show up at 4 o'clock p.m. today, I'm going to be just hanging out and discipling people. He said, no, you guys are coming with me. And we're going to talk about the things that I'm preaching to other people. I'm going to explain them in a way that I'm not explaining to anyone else. I'm going to invest stuff in you because when this is all done, you're going to turn around and do it for other people. And you need to be ready. Social space, remember that's 20 to 50 people, and it looks like extended family. It looks like my family in Alabama, my mom's side of the family, getting together for Thanksgiving where there's 3 generations or more is what we're going for. Okay, so it needs to be multi-generational. And they're like kids running through and dogs chasing after things. And like, it's crazy. It's fun. There's these people are sitting playing a game in the other room, and these folks are arguing over football, and people are cleaning up in the kitchen and talking about their kids and who they're dating. That's extended family. I'm painting a picture because most of us don't know that because we haven't been around it. In this, the purposes are extended family and mission. Mission happens really well in this space. You know how I know that? Because that's where Jesus did it. Jesus brought people into other people's oikos and said, hey, come into their home. I'm going to bust open the doors. Come on in here. Whether you are upstanding Pharisee who's seeking or you are demon-possessed and have prostituted yourself, it doesn't really matter. Everybody here in this oikos is welcome. So he went out on mission in that size group. For us, now remember, this doesn't do other things well. 20 to 50 people, you're not going to disciple people in the same high invitation, high challenge, intentional way that we talked about in the last space. There's some things it's not good at. That's okay. They're not all of them are going to be good at the same things or all the things. That's the point. But here, our primary vehicle is what we call missional communities. So you see both sides. Missional community, right? We could call it a missional family or some sort of oikos group or something. That is what we do on Saturday nights right now, the first and third Saturday night of the month. I would encourage you now, it's not the only one. Eventually we will have many, many, many that are based on the mission, the specific missional purpose of each one, digging into a certain people group or a certain space or a certain neighborhood. Eventually there will be lots of places, and that is how we're going to reach this county. And that's how we're going to reach the world in this space that nobody in the American church seems to know about. We do small groups, we do huge groups. We have no idea that this space right in the middle is actually where these things happen really well. So we're going to dig into it more and more. And if you're not part of a missional community, you need to be. You need to jump in. Because then that's when we start to look and say, hey, for you, all of you guys who are in this, who are your people of peace? Let's go there. Let's do what they love. Let's reach them. Hey, all of a sudden, the people that Sarah know interact with Kyle. And she's like, oh, I was wondering why I'm in this person's life. It was to meet Kyle. But there's no way to meet Kyle unless something is bringing the family together. Get it? Jesus did this, so we should be doing this. Public space, 50 or more. The purposes are vision and teaching and celebration. Sometimes you just want to celebrate with a bunch of folks, right? When we go to that Bethel night, there will be hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe more, all gathered together, and there's something very powerful in that space. Now, we don't need to do it every day, right? We need to actually be having super hard conversations about what's actually happening in our lives and praying for each other every day. But we don't need to be doing the big group thing every day. But it's a really great thing to have because then we get to celebrate together. We get to say, hey, there's this amazing thing that happened, with Robert and Eric this week. And so it makes sense to stand up here in this place and do that. Talk about that. We realized at some point that we really did need this space. We kind of put it to the side in the beginning because every church we'd ever been a part of idolizes this space. Idolizes it, okay? In church planting, people would not stop asking us, when are you launching? When are you launching? Which means, when are you starting the public service, which is what we're doing now? When are you putting something out to the community so they can show up to your thing? Now, as it turns out, it's a really helpful space to have. It's really important. But we were not going to just do that and skip over the discipleship part and the mission part and the family part. We did it when it seemed right, when those other spaces were bearing too much weight. They were bearing weight that should be borne here. That's when we did it. And it makes a lot of sense. It's a really great thing. And one day we'll have hopefully hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. We may not be able to fit in this room. That's the goal. This space can grow as big as it needs to because all those other things are happening in other spaces. Our primary vehicle for this purpose is our gathering, which is what's happening here. Now, I know you're looking around. You're like, there's not 50 plus people here. But there will be, especially as we continue to lean into mission. And it will be okay. We may not have everybody all the time talking to everybody at the back. That's okay because we have missional communities. There may not be a family feel here the same way it is now. This is functioning more like that social space right now, Everybody kind of knows everybody or at least kind of has seen them. That's the way a missional community actually functions. But as we grow out of it, it will be fine for people to come and say, I don't know all these people because they know some people. And that's the point. We just get to gather more people in that space. So I want to show you the big picture. And a lot of this is just casting vision, because I really want you guys to understand there's a reason that we do all this stuff. If it didn't make sense and it wasn't strategic and it wasn't going to lead us to anything, believe me, I would have stopped banging the drum a long time ago. I know that this is being engaged in all these different spaces is what's actually going to bear fruit. I know that because I look at Jesus, and it did in his life, so it will in ours. It will in our church. The big picture looks like this. First, the public space. So the public space is Elements Church. That's that big square. Okay? Then you add into that missional communities. The smaller spaces that are 50 to 60, 70 people, whatever. 20 to 50 people, sorry. And you notice how some of those overlap with each other. Some of them go even outside our little boundary, because there may be people who are engaged in that who never come to this space. That's okay. There may be people who are reached who never are a part of anything else. I get that. Ideally, most of it will be part of our family, right? But all these other little things are going to interact with each other. And then you overlay onto that huddles, which is that discipleship space. And again, look at that. Now, ideally, huddles will be part of a missional community. As people are living out oikos together, they will also be using that other space. Right now, huddles have been very segregated from missional communities, because that's just where we've been as we go. But that's not where we're going in the future. Discipleship will be happening within the extended family. It just makes sense, right? It just makes sense. But some of those huddles might pull in people who are not part of that missional community. Some of those huddles might even pull out people who are not part of our church. Sweet. Let's do it. We're discipling people. We're living a family on mission. I don't care. I don't care who the people are. I don't care if they ever come here. I don't care if they ever call us their church. I don't care. What I care about is that the whole kingdom of God is at work in all these different spaces to change the world. That's what it looks like when we're following Jesus' predictable patterns. They're saying, Jesus, what did you do with your life? It's not like it's hidden. It's just we haven't seen it. I don't know. We just haven't seen it. Other people have seen it. The American church hasn't seen it. We started small groups to solve the problem of that one big square. In the 70s, small groups started because all of a sudden churches started growing bigger than a missional community size, which was unusual a few generations ago. Every church in America practically was a missional community size. You know why? People like to be in family. They didn't want to grow bigger than that, because then they lost the sense of family. As churches started being attractional and offering a really good product on their Sunday services for people to consume, then people started showing up for that part of it and not for the family part. And they said, oh man, we need to let people who are part of our church get to know each other. That's how small groups started. It wasn't really discipleship based. It certainly wasn't missional based. Now, there's nothing wrong with small groups. Fill in all those gaps with small groups and every other Bible study that you can think of. But what we're going to put our energy into is those spaces that Jesus did, because those are his predictable patterns. Now, you, of course, find those intimate space people. That's on you, because we can't create that pattern. But every other pattern we are trying to create. So use it, engage in it, throw your whole heart into it. Because as we do these things on mission, like that is just this crazy, weird, I just kept pushing paste, copy and pasting more of those huddles on. I'm like, oh God, for 9 years we've been there. Really, ultimately, even though we wouldn't have had that picture and that language for that. That's why we came here. That's why we've been here. That's why we labor for this stuff. That's why we turn around and sometimes we're like, is there anything at all happening with all this investment and all this prayer and all this sacrifice and all this heart out that everybody who's been a part of this has put in? Sprigs are starting to pop up from the ground to be able to see that sort of thing. You know that? It's happening very slowly. We got to keep leaning into it. Jesus established for us as his family predictable patterns. And for us, that's what it looks like. So jump in. And one last thing, and then Rochelle's going to come up and share a word. He always sent out the disciples 2 by 2. We never go out by ourselves. He even, where is it? Matthew 21, he sends out 2 disciples to go get a couple of donkeys. I'm pretty sure one dude could have gotten the donkeys. You know what I'm saying? But they're so used to going 2 by 2. Never. We cannot do this stuff on our own, guys. Even if it's just pulling one other person with us, we are meant to go 2 by 2 all the time. So Rochelle, come up and share what God put on your heart for Family on Mission, and then we're going to end.
So a lot of you guys know that I write spoken words, but Leila put on my heart just to think about writing something for Family on Mission. And so this one is about Family on Mission. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. So I've often wondered why the Western church lacks a certain commitment and passion to God. Why do so many believers just walk away? Why, unlike our Eastern counterparts, are we not ready to die for our faith? or for us just get rejected for it? Why are so many self-proclaimed Christians not living as such? I used to think that the devil had the Western church so distracted by stuff that we missed the importance of our eternal calling. I used to think that it was the consumer culture found in our churches today. And while I believe that these are all a part of it, I think it's more simple than that. I think the Western church is just bored. I think that it is more, and sorry, lost my place. I used to think that the consumer culture was there, but I think that the Western church is just bored. There is no challenge and there is no risk. There is nothing worth giving your life for. And if we are not challenged, if we are not challenged to do more than just be a group, if it's not worth giving our lives for, then we have nothing but a religious membership for a church. Just a hobby, a club that is attended to, and that is not what the church was supposed to be. So I ask you this question: what is the church? The first thoughts that pop into your head speak a lot of what you have learned and have come to believe about the church. Did the first thought look like a stadium full of people worshiping? Did you get a picture of you begrudgingly rising to go each week? When you thought of the church, was it confined to just Sundays? When Jesus started his public ministry, he gathers a group of men around him. These 12 walked with him, they ate bread with him, and they lived with him. But these men were not just bystanders in God's manifesto. They were a part of what Jesus was doing. He sent them out to do what he did, to proclaim the gospel, to heal the sick, to call out the demon-possessed, and to set the captives free. Jesus did more than just invite these men into his life to listen to him speak every Sunday at the synagogue. He invites them on mission with him to bring God's kingdom to earth, not alone, but alongside 11 others. Jesus' purpose was twofold: create a family that carries out his mission. Family and mission, not one without the other. In Matthew 12:48 through 58, after being sought out by his biological family, Jesus says this: "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand, he said towards his disciple, he said, "Here are my mother and brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother and my brother and my sister." Jesus affirms that his family are those that do his will alone, his mission. But being a family on mission will cost you everything. The disciples left their families behind and everything they knew that was safe and comforting, and followed Jesus to be a part of his family, a part of his mission. A group of fishermen, tax collectors, and sinners. The church in Acts, after being baptized by the Holy Spirit, became a family. They did not just meet on Sundays or another day in the week. They prayed together. They met at each other's houses. They devoted themselves to the Word of God and even provided for each other to the point of selling their own stuff to meet each other's needs. They were of one mind and one body, and they had everything in common. This is the type of family that God has called us to. It is not just about us and about our personal relationships with Christ. It's about the entire family. But I'd be lying if I said that it was just about the family. We are called to more. Jesus also calls us to expand his family. Before Jesus returns to the Father, he says to go out into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Do as I have done with you. The challenge was made and the cost was very, very great. God called them to be like him, and he meant even to the death. Just as Jesus gathered men around him, the disciples gathered men around them and taught them to do what Jesus did. Going out, those who were considered the least, and finding them and making disciples. And the call for us is the same, a family on mission. But let's be honest. It's really hard to let people in. Allowing people to come and see us when it's easier just to go it by yourselves. It means that the church would have to go beyond Sundays and small groups and the occasional Bible study. It means our priorities would have to shift from our family to God's family and bowing to that. It means going out of our comfort zone and reaching out and sharing God's word with not just our family, but with others. Others not like ourselves, those who may reject us. It means a lot of dying to self, but oh, is it worth it? In Matthew 19:27, Peter asks a really good question to Jesus. He says, "We have left everything for you and followed you, so what will we have?" And Jesus says, "All who have left mother and father, children and land for my sake, will receive 100-fold and eternal life." This call to being family on mission, it is worth it for eternity's perspective, but it is also worth it on this side of eternity. There is a beauty and there is a fullness of being a part of God's family. You have purpose and mission, and you're provided for and loved. It is messy, and it will cost your whole entire life, but oh, is it worth it?
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm just going to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes as we finish up here. Now let's just give a minute for the Lord to speak what he might want to. We're always asking, what is God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? So we just want to give you a second to just ask the Lord as we're right here in the space, what are you saying to me through this message, through the spoken word, through the testimony, through the worship time, whatever.